All right, rock and roll. So yeah, what's been new and exciting in your life? What's going on?
Well, just finished Succession. Don't know if you've seen it.
I have not seen it yet, but I hear raving reviews. So on a scale from 1 to 10, where would you put it?
Oh yeah, I'd say a 9. It is really good.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool, man. Well, do you want to, I guess, introduce yourself? Talk about your book and your veganism, your activism.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm Benny Malone. I've written a book, How to Argue with Vegans, which is an ironic title. Called a few people who've left negative reviews for it. They actually thought it was How to Argue Against Veganism, and I think they've been disappointed when they found out it's actually pro-vegan. So basically, the way it progresses through the book is people not wanting to talk about the subject at all, through to where they're almost kind of agreeing with it, maybe 99%. And then we can look at just arguing in those areas then. But my main kind of thesis with it is, if you want to argue against vegans, you actually have to adopt a lot of the premises, and you're almost going to be approaching a vegan position anyway. And then maybe you're going to be in some kind of adjacent position where you're not that far off from being vegan anyway. So why not just be vegan?
Awesome. Yeah, I started reading it and I really enjoy it, and I like the title a lot because it oftentimes we'll write
Mm.
papers and books and things about veganism, but vegans are the ones that read it, right? So if you have a title like How to Argue with Vegans, it's like
Yeah,
now you're bringing in the audience of non-vegans, which is probably a better activism approach, I think.
yeah. Well, years ago, I used to, proactively try and look up what are the best arguments against veganism, because I used to be in these debate groups. So you'd try and preempt them, and you didn't want to be taken by surprise by any kind of anti-vegan arguments. So we started kind of building up a good kind of FAQ kind of approach to it. This is me and the other admins in the kind of Facebook groups we ran. So we'd come across everything you can think of really, but now and again there'd be like a novel question that we hadn't really thought about. So you would try and seek them out, and then what are actually the strongest arguments against veganism? I'd find that they would often be about practicality and kind of adopting a lot of the vegan premises, like I say, and then turning it round back on veganism a little bit, which I find quite a lot of that's going on these days as well, where people will say, oh, well, I'm 99% vegan, but what about this issue? So it's not really major arguments as I see them, but the things that maybe you could almost call it kind of intra-vegan disagreements in a way.
Hmm. Yeah, I do notice a lot of the modern discourse is a lot of yeah, vegans arguing with vegans about um obscure uh
Yeah,
disagreements. Yeah, about
yeah,
whether you're a suffering based vegan or a rights based vegan,
mhm,
or whether you like bivalves or wild
yeah,
animal
yeah,
suffering. Yeah.
yeah, definitely kind of contrarian positions really as well. That it's not going to be the mainstream. It's not going to be anyone's main argument for veganism or against veganism, because even if you only disagreed in, say, the bivalve area, you would still have to agree with all the other positions anyway. That would only be the one area of disagreement. So I try not to really argue too much about those areas now. You
Yeah, we
lose
don't
friendships. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, yeah. I think I shouldn't argue about those like
yeah.
obscure areas, but I do because I enjoy to do it, and
Mm,
there's sort of a little bit
yeah.
of a battle there. Yeah.
I think what
Um
it is as well is we get so tired of the kind of anti-vegans arguments, and we know they're not very good. So then when you've kind of been through all that argument, you kind of still wanting to argue with people, and the only people left are vegans. So I think that's why there is a lot of infighting, really. You've kind of, maybe when you've been vegan for a couple of years, you've seen and heard it all, really. So then who else is there to argue against? I think that's kind of why we turn on each other then.
You know, that would make a lot of sense. I definitely feel a little bit bored
Yeah,
arguing with non-vegans. It's like the same
yeah,
talking points come up over and over again. In fact, the arguments against veganism are like is one of the main reasons I went vegan.
mhm,
Had been I heard a speech from Alex O'Connor and he kind of
mhm.
convinced me morally. And then but I really liked In-N-Out Burger, so I went on Facebook and I asked all my friends and family, "Hey, give me an argument against veganism." And I just got comments and comments of bad arguments, and it just
Yeah,
yeah, it further convinced me. It's like, oh gosh, now
yeah,
I have to go vegan, and I was like, I had to like reluctantly go vegan because I didn't want to do it, but
yeah. I was very much like that. I was kind of, I think I had the cognitive dissonance. I was vegetarian first, and then so I'd got it settled in my head about not eating any flesh and how animals are treated in the meat industry, but I was totally clueless about dairy. I didn't eat eggs anyway. I think I accidentally ate eggs a few times while I was vegetarian, but most of the products that were vegetarian didn't really have eggs in, so it was just not something I come across, and I didn't really like them. But it wasn't really an ethical thing. I didn't know about the chick maceration, all those things. What it was coming onto social media and coming across vegans who were educating about dairy and eggs. And then, but with dairy, I think I had the cognitive dissonance of thinking, well, maybe it's not that bad, and still kind of hanging on to it for a bit. And then I did come across Gary Francione's page as well, and he called me a speciesist. And I was like, well, what's that, And then I had to look up all these things. And, I hate being on the wrong side of a debate or an argument, but I think I'm quite good if I realize I've got a bad argument, I will drop it straight away, pretty much, because I just don't want to have bad arguments. So I think I'm quite good at dropping arguments if I think I come across a better one. So that's basically why I went vegan. And one of the pages I came across as well was Veganism is not a diet, which was a good page on Facebook. So I was like, well, if it's not a diet, what is it then? And so I kind of looked up more about the philosophy then and about it being anti-exploitation and that type of thing. More to do with other things, not just to do with diet. And then another page was the bloody dairy industry. So that's where I got educated about calf separation and everything that goes on in the dairy industry, really. And then, but even then, when I was still debating this with other people, even being vegan for a bit, they'd be like, "Well, suffering quotient for dairy is the lowest out of all animal products." And then even then, you've got that cognitive dissonance of, well, maybe it's not so bad. But now I'm of the opinion that dairy is one of the worst for the way animals are treated and the way they're commodified in that industry.
yeah, no, I like if I had to pick, like you can only give up meat or you can only give up dairy. I think I'd rather
Mhm.
have them give up dairy. Yeah.
Yeah, for the length of time and the repeated kind of exploitation over time. And obviously, it goes against a lot of principles that people say they have and the values we say we hold as well.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, obviously, I think we both largely agree on veganism. We might have some separate,
Yeah.
um, some slight issues, but
Mhm.
I think it would be fun to maybe for a little bit, not spend too much time. But what do you think? If you put on your non-vegan hat, like, what do you think is the greatest argument against veganism?
Oof. Well, I think it is what I call reflexive arguments, where you turn veganism back on itself. So you say, okay, I'm going to adopt the premises of veganism. Say, let's say, if I'm thinking like in a utilitarian sense for a minute, least harm kind of principle. And then you would get into some areas where you say, well, veganism isn't the best in this particular area. And if I was really playing devil's advocate, they would say, well, it'd be like the crop deaths kind of argument. Maybe there is a situation in which a person completely living off grid, and they're only eating one animal a year, that's meant to cause less suffering than an industrialized vegan living in, say, the UK or the US, and causing more pollution and everything like that. And I do go over that in the book. It's kind of turning veganism back on itself. You say, okay, then I accept your premises that we should care about animals, but what if vegans really were causing more harm to more animals? Or even if you want to look at it from a rights position, which is how this argument did come about originally, because Steve Davis, who came out with that argument against Tom Reagan, he was saying, well, my argument is actually a rights argument against Reagan's position. He's saying, well, if animals have rights, what about the rights violations in these areas as well? So I think the argument fails, but that's me just playing devil's advocate, that if there was going to be a strong argument against veganism, that's where it would be, but it still fails, I think.
Yeah, I actually agree, and I actually am a utilitarian, a pretty strict
Mhm.
utilitarian, and
Yeah,
that's sort of the issues that come up with me. But again, I don't think they're actually correct. I don't think there is more suffering um,
yeah,
within crop deaths than with hunting or with eating meat. So, but yeah, that's I have the same intuitions.
mm,
Yeah, I think the greatest argument is comes from like a utilitarian sense of less suffering from killing one deer versus crop deaths from all your vegan foods. Yeah.
yeah. One that did baffle me for a while as well was the kind of logic of the larder, where I was thinking, and that could be a utilitarian argument as well, where it's, the animals wouldn't exist at all. And I think because you still got that bit of cognitive dissonance about that as well, and we all like our companion animals, and we actually like pigs and cows, and you're thinking, well, if they didn't exist, isn't it better if they have some life rather than none? So it took me a while to get around that argument as well. Um, so you would have some situations where it's completely unrealistic, but would it be better to have that life? At least you've got the life and live a good life, even in almost sanctuary conditions, and then that kind of painless death. I don't actually accept these arguments. This is me being devil's advocate again, but for me, it's the commodification, and the same with the crop deaths. It's not just some or a death count versus a death count. Like the vegan is killing 10 animals, and this supposed ideal non-vegan is only killing one animal. For me, you've still got more suffering or more commodification anyway in the animal industries, because you're separating the animals from their families, you're violating their bodies in a lot of ways, violating their autonomy, and the animal that's wild does die, which is unfortunate, but hopefully there can be ways to fix that as well. I saw something recently about using ultrasound on the harvesters, which is something I thought of a few years back, but people are actually looking into that now and warn the mice. I think the mice pick up on it anyway, and when they did look at, the only studies that are on there, the crop deaths, most of the mice were killed by predators rather than the farm machinery. I think it was 30 killed by predators in the field afterwards, and one was killed by the farm machinery. I think there's probably more deaths from poisoning than actual harvesting anyway.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially with crop deaths, they'll look at this like these often harms that we like cause to animals to grow our crops, but they don't look at what that's opposed to. It's like, well, if we weren't growing these crops, there would there would be more deaths from predators and more, and arguably
Mm,
worse deaths. Yeah. Um,
yeah, I think that's
I
a
wanted to.
good counter to it. You look at the amounts of land. taken up by, say, vegan agriculture, would there be more suffering on that land anyway, in the kind of wild animal suffering sense? So it's kind of getting into another argument is the logic of the logger, where you think that kind of environmental destruction is actually good because that decreases, the kind of net suffering anyway.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not positive how I feel about it. I guess I don't know enough about nature to have a strong argument, but I understand the logic behind it at least. There's a I caught maybe a little bit of a disagreement that we have. So
Mhm.
I I'm actually this is a disagreement I have with a lot of vegans is that I'm actually pro uh I'm pro like pet ownership.
Mhm.
Um I think pets generally have a net positive life, especially if you're a good pet owner. And the problems that we have with pet ownership, where you have bad pet owners, and things like this, I think can be regulated, and we can have licenses to own a pet and things like this. But overall, I think the idea of pet ownership is a good thing, because I think it's better to have existed than to never have existed, and that's true for animals as well. Um, So when it goes to farm animals, a lot of people again will use this argument to say that we ought to farm animals for food, and in these factory farms. And I don't think we can make that jump. Um, I think the same way that we can have
Yeah.
companion animals, we can have companion farm animals. We can take care of pigs and cows um, in ways that are beneficial to both of us without having to kill them. And even though that might be a commodification, right? A pet is a commodification. We're breeding animals for the purpose of our own pleasure. But I think it benefits them as well. So I think that might be a disagreement we have, where I think we actually ought to commodify animals in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think
what would be
when I say commodification, sorry, yeah, it's normally it is the negative type of commodification I would normally be talking about when you're talking sanctuary conditions and kind of when we're looking after our companion animals. I mean, I think we should still adopt rather than be breeding animals for now. I mean, I've adopted a dog, so I'm looking after a dog at the moment, and I've always kind of had companion animals as well. So there is that thing there. There's that cognitive there anyway, where you wouldn't like to see dogs completely disappear. But I don't think we're in danger of that anyway for the time being. I mean, you could have kind of the free living, almost kind of liminal animals that we kind of look after. Um, I just think I don't think it's a good idea to be promoting the idea of breeding and commodification though at the moment. Maybe that'd be
with
where the
all
disagreement is.
with all the well, I don't think there's any reason you can't do both. I think the most people should adopt and not shop. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think there should be at least a small amount of breeders that exist to keep that um, the dogs alive. Yeah. Uh, and an area where it actually might be a little bit where the commodification actually might harm the individual animal, but maybe better in the long run. It would be like how a lot of like AZA accredited zoos will breed animals in order to protect a species, and it may be the case that that species not going extinct actually has an overall net utility.
Mhm.
So you may want to actually harm individual animals like in a zoo and breed them in order for uh, the bigger picture to be positive. What do you think about that?
Well, I can kind of see that with the wild animal suffering kind of debate that's going on as well. It's you kind of have one side to say, well, it's only the individual animal that matters, but I think that's too reductionist. I think because the environment still does matter to the individual animal anyway. I mean, we say at the fundamental level, it is the sentience of the individual that matters. But in order for the individual to flourish, they might need other animals of the same species they might even need, other species of animal as well. And as humans, we're in that position anyway. We need other species of animal, um, like pollinators. Even looking at it from a selfish point of view, humans need the environment and we need other animals. So that's kind of my stance on it. But I do prioritize, the individual well-being. So it would boil down to that. But yeah, I don't know which situations I'd be in favour of breeding. It would have to be You would have to get down to the situation where, say, one group of individuals is going to be really have a really, their rights are really going to be violated. They're not going to flourish at all, and then that would, necessitate some sort of breeding to keep other species alive. But as it stands, I don't think humans should be breeding other animals because just of the process that is involved anyway. Maybe you set up situations where animals can be as free living as possible.
Yeah, I think if any breeding is happening, it should be done by like professionals and for a pretty clear goal for the most part, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, so as far as your veganism goes, where I tend to be more of like utilitarian suffering based, and it sounds like you're seem to be a little bit more of a rights sort of based. Um, what yeah, where do you see the differences there, and why would you move towards more of a rights based approach?
I would move more towards. I think it just has stronger protection and a kind of stronger argument for kind of respect and dignity of the individual, really. So the thing I see about utilitarianism often leans towards more welfare of keeping kind of animal commodification going and kind of animal um, breeding and animal agriculture going, really, in a lot of ways. Um, the kind of the areas I disagree mainly with utilitarianism would be the replaceability arguments from Singer, really, where he kind of uses that logic of the larder and says, well, if this animal has a net positive life, we can kill that animal and then replace that animal with another animal that will have the same or even better utility. So there's kind of problems of aggregation there as well. Like, how do you measure that utility and how does the utility exist in the world and carry over? Because to me, that individual has lost everything, and replacing them doesn't replace anything for that individual. It replaces this kind of abstract notion of utility that is kind of floating in the air, and that's the thing that is prioritized rather than the individual. So that's kind of my main disagreement there with that kind of Singer utilitarianism, which I think, he wrote Animal Liberation, say in, I think, 74, 75, or, it's had the anniversary, hasn't it, recently? Maybe it's 73. So, yeah, I think it's 73 because it's the anniversary. So then I think he got some new ideas off Derek Parfit, which are was kind of the replaceability thing. And that kind of, he went into a different kind of utilitarianism, which kind of led to this replaceability idea. So that's my main disagreement there, that you can replace the individual to benefit this idea of kind of utility in the world, which is of no consolation to the individual. And we don't think that way about humans, and we don't think that way about a lot of companion animals either. Because let's say my dog died a year ago now, so I wasn't thinking I'll just replace the utility of Erin with another dog, you know, and I wasn't thinking about replacing the dog at all. Really, the opportunity came up to adopt another dog, but that dog's got a completely different life, different interests, and their own individuality. I'm not looking to replace some level of utility in the world.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I imagine that there are some disagreements there. But then again, I'd like to reemphasize that this is like one of the obscure things we were talking about, where on a
Yeah.
large whole we come to the same conclusions. You shouldn't buy animal products. You shouldn't um,
Hmm.
commodify animals, at least for the large part. And uh, yeah, the exploitation of animals is wrong. Um, I know we didn't want to go big into the topic, but I did just want to ask you, um, just real quick, your stance on bivalves. And we don't have to go crazy into it, but
Yeah, this is the one that loses friends.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, the thing with bivalves was years ago when I was modding these groups, it would tend to be a bit of an anti-vegan talking point, kind of just totally distract you and kind of suck you into that argument. That's why I never liked talking about it much. And but then people would say, "Oh well, we don't want to debate this issue," and they would kind of get upset then as well. And I put a bit of a ban on the topic, Facebook groups, because it was just taking up so much time. And when you look at, the problems we're facing, trying to talk to people and trying to get people to care about 18,000 cows being burnt to death, and recently a truck full of cows getting burnt to death. A few miles from me, 10,000 chickens getting burnt to death in barns. It just seems like a bit of a niche topic. But it's not that we can't talk about it, because we don't want to get into any fallacies like where we can't talk about smaller issues. I still think it is an important issue, and it's if there is pain there or anything, it's an important issue. Um, the main thing I came up against with it was people saying that they disagree with a precautionary principle. So even if I agreed with bivalve veganism, say, and that, I mean, I've said to people that I've discussed it with, like Dr. Avi and people like that, I think a world of bivalve vegans would be better than the world we've got at the moment. So in that way, it's better. And if it was just bivalve vegans and vegans arguing, that would be fine. We'd only be persuading each other about one thing. But the way I see it, they try and push it a bit as a wedge issue and try and make vegans seem unreasonable because they don't want to eat bivalves, which to me is pushing it too far. I mean, when I discussed it with Avi, he said he wouldn't really push it that far, that he wouldn't make it into a big issue, whereas people I've discussed have tried to say, well, vegans are illogical and unreal for not wanting to eat bivalves. And I think that is taking it too far. Why press the issue on vegans that much, really? And I don't think a precautionary principle is that unreasonable. Even if I disagreed with it, I would be pursuing vegans that follow the precautionary principle and saying they were illogical. I think the kind of cultural currency veganism has got, and most of my friends that aren't vegan, they understand the they've got of veganism as that it means not eating any animal flesh, and they're just totally baffled by this being an issue anyway. Not that maybe they don't understand the nuances of the argument, but to them it just means no animal products, and because it's already got that kind of cultural understanding, I think you're coming across like the kind of semantic inertia of trying to change the meaning of it now is going to be an uphill struggle, and it's already upsetting a lot of vegans anyway, trying to change that. So I'm in favor of people just calling themselves Val vegans if they want to, or Austro vegan, and I'm fine with that. We disagree in one area, it's fine, but I think vegan, leave it as it is. Even the harshest kind of bivalves that I used to argue with, even they said they don't think vegan labeling should be changed. Vegan labeling should stay as no animal products. So, and I think that that's the way.
Yeah, I can get that. So yeah, the topic of like the vegan definition, that's a really interesting one. I know
Mhm.
Peter Singer was on Alex O'Connor's podcast the other day, and he was talking about how he calls himself a flexible vegan, and that was really interesting to me because aside from a few disagreements, especially when it comes to like how he determines what eggs would be ethical and stuff like this, but
Mhm.
I largely agreed with him. Like, and it made me wonder. It's like, well, should I? I mean, I do eat bivalves, and it's like I do eat animal products that are gonna be thrown away. So like if you order the vegan meal and it comes and there's some cheese on it or something like this, like I don't have an issue eating that. Um, and these are kind of like the reasons that Peter calls himself a flexible vegan. And
Mhm.
and I don't have an issue with like calling myself something different than a vegan. I don't think I should change the definition of veganism to fit my
Yeah,
morals, right?
yeah,
Um, yeah, so that's at least it's been extremely interesting for me because I've been kind of playing with that idea of maybe calling myself an Austro vegan or um, or a flexible vegan or something like this. So
yeah.
do you
Sorry, go on.
agree with the standard the vegan society definition?
Yeah, for the most part, I would be just because they came up with it and that's what got established. And then kind of the people like Leslie Cross developed it into being an anti-exploitation stance. Um, for me, for the kind of what you call yourself, I can I can understand a lot of the arguments on a practical level. What is the harm that's being caused, kind of thing. But for me, I would use more kind of indirect duty kind of arguments for those areas. So for me, a lot of the hypotheticals and these situations that you find yourself in, they're kind of, for me, they'd be one-off situations. So I've been served meals by accident in restaurants years ago, where I've eaten egg accidentally, but it's not something I would want to repeat. And the thing is, I've made a point of saying I've been served the wrong thing. Now, a lot of the people that are against this kind of thing will say, oh, the vegan causes a fuss and then turns people off forever from going vegan. But I think it's kind of the opposite. You're kind of helping the next vegan, and if you're nice about it and try and make people understand what veganism is and that you're serious about it, they take it more seriously, and it helps the next vegan down the line not to get served the wrong thing again. So, worst case scenario, one vegan makes a fuss, but then the kitchen thinks, well, let's not repeat that mistake. And then they're not thinking, well, actually, vegans don't mind being served oysters, vegans don't mind being served eggs or various animal products. So I think if you look at it more from long term point of view, it's helping normalize that that's what veganism means long term, and that we take it seriously as well. Whereas a lot of these hypotheticals and even situations we do actually find ourselves in are kind of one offs that I think we can kind of remedy at the time and help the next vegan out or help that person out with understanding what veganism is.
Yeah. I definitely understand that understand that position. Um, something that happens at least that's happened with me before is oftentimes you're in a restaurant or a place where you've ordered food and that's not possible. Um, so like an example would be DoorDash. If you order food from DoorDash, um, you can't like you can complain I guess on the app, um,
Yeah,
but no one's gonna come back and grab the food from you, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I think yeah, situations like that, and the situation that Peter Singer brought up was like if you're on an airplane, um,
yeah,
yeah, where there's no like chef on the airplane cooking the food. It's like the
Mm.
or cooking the making the little gift basket or whatever. Um,
For me, I've
yes,
actually gone without meals on planes, and I'll have a fast day. I won't eat it. So it's the same. There's pretty much you can always get fruit at an
hmm
airport, or I'll always try. The thing with me is I'll always try and exhaust every possibility. Whereas Singer, I don't know if he's still using the Paris exemption, but if you look up on Happy Cow now, there's hundreds of vegan eateries now, or places where you can get vegan food in Paris. Maybe 20 years ago, when he came out with the argument, there weren't. But to still be using the Paris exemption is a bit of a cop out now, I think. When
I agree. Yeah, I mean I largely agree with Singer, but I think he goes too far in many
Yeah,
areas.
if you're
Um,
looking for an excuse, you'll find one, and I think that is looking a bit too for an easy way out too much. Whereas I'll be looking for the hard way out. I'll try and exhaust everything.
yeah, it reminds me of like Joey Carbstrong, um, just giving this rave review of Huel,
Oh yeah,
for Alex O'Connor. And in fact, Joey actually convinced me to start doing Huel. So I
yeah,
actually majority of my calories come from Huel, and it's actually been amazing because uh, I don't like to cook, and if I can just
yeah.
have these drinks and get the majority of my nutrients, then it's been awesome for me.
I got it after that as well. I got some of the drinks, and my wife actually got some of the meals because we were like, oh, let's give it a go, because we were discussing the Alex O'Connor thing, and that was thanks to Joey. So I don't know if Joey's going to get a deal with them or something.
He needs to, yeah, because he
Yeah,
was just doing it out of his own like volition. There was no sponsorship or anything.
yeah.
I guess speaking of Joey Carbstrong, who do you think is the currently who do you think is the greatest vegan activist?
Well, the people I favour at the moment, I'm really leaning towards vegan sociology. That's where I'm finding the kind of ideas I have about veganism, and it having that social aspect to it, and the kind of sociologist understanding of it. So whenever I see like Corey Lee Wren write something, or Roger Yates, and there's other sociologists, Matthew Cole, Kate Stewart, anything they write, I kind of find that's kind of what I'm really leaning towards at the moment. That's kind of what my understanding of veganism seems to be. That it's got this sociological element to it as well, and obviously looking at the history of the movement as well, which I think it's good for vegans to come in and have the kind of have that understanding of veganism to begin with, where you can just debate the issue straight away, in fairly simple terms. But then I think to be respectful to the movement as well, look into the history of it, and kind of not be completely bound to how it was 75 years ago or anything, but look at how the movement's taken in more considerations. I mean, going back to bivalves, I think that's something they never even thought about at the beginning. So it's something that's had to be kind of accommodated and debated and thought about. They definitely thought about honey, but did they really think about all the kind of ways fruits and vegetables are pollinated, and a lot of these issues that are coming in now, and then a lot of the kind of intersectional stuff that's come in recently. But I'd say, yeah, the vegan sociologists are kind of where I kind of find my home. I do think Earthling Ed is good. I think when he talks to people, he's great. Um, when we talk, we might give him a bit of a hard time, thinking, oh, we should be discussing this, he should be discussing that. But I think he keeps his nose fairly clean. He keeps it fairly simple. Whereas it's stuff that he knows, if you know what I mean. He doesn't kind of lose focus and go too far out. He'll just keep it fairly focused on animals, which is great. And the way he talks to people is really good. I think Joey's good as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Earthling Ed. I think
Mhm.
a lot of us are. He's one of the best. especially because he really employs this like Socratic approach, or like this street epistemology approach, which is
Yeah.
extremely good. While I have, while I enjoy a lot of like the ask yourself like debate
Hmm.
bro sort of um, community,
Yeah.
I'm I have issues with that approach.
Hmm.
Um, I've said it's possible that like vegan gains actually might be more harmful to the movement than uh, positive. And I'm actually a big fan of vegan gains. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. What as far as the like sociology sort of veganism, yeah, how does that look different from like your traditional sides of veganism? What sort of um, yeah, different answers would they give or different approaches?
I think it's just a more holistic approach. I think it kind of it's veganism in context of the society we live in, really. So, I mean, like you say, with the debate stuff, I find that a lot of that lacks the context. Like I was saying about the semantic usage of veganism, looking at it sociologically, you would look at, you would do a survey of what does veganism mean to people, and then we'd be like, well, what are the gaps in knowledge that people need to have about veganism? We have a kind of shared understanding for the most part about what veganism is because we've thought about it a lot. But when we go out to Joe Public, what's their understanding, and what's the bridge there, and also what is the problem veganism is trying to solve? I think is a good way of thinking about it. Um, so that's a good way to see what the focus is of veganism. A lot of the intersectional stuff that came in, people were worried that veganism would lose the focus. I don't really share that fear so much. I do sympathise with it a little bit, where people try and Roger Yates talks about the focus and the scope of veganism. So I think that's a good way of thinking about it. The focus is animals and animal exploitation, and the scope would be wider issues with veganism. That's where you get into the sociology. So then you would start looking at, well, how do people access vegan food, all these issues, and it's actually a lot of the kind of anti-vegan leftist kind of talking points that they might come up with, about food deserts. So we need answers to those things, I think, and I think sociology has the answers to a lot of those talking points, and the kind of no ethical consumption under capitalism, that type of thing, which, a couple of years ago, that was my number one annoying argument. I haven't seen it for a while,
Yeah.
but it was kind of the anti-vegan leftist arguments were really quite annoying for a while.
Yeah, no, I can see how that would actually be really important because I think overall leftists are more likely to go vegan than
Mm,
someone who's on the right would be. So if you're answering these questions that they're more likely to have, like consumption, ethical consumption over under capitalism, then yeah, I would imagine that'd be a very effective.
yeah, I think with the debate bro thing as well, with it not being in context, it's like when you were saying about who are the vegan advocates, here's Dosser.
Oh, very good.
So who are the good vegan advocates? It's like we say, Joey and Ed. They can debate the issues, but I think they've got that eye on advocacy, whereas I think a lot of the debate bros kind of take their eye off advocacy in a lot of ways. They just want to win the debate, and they're not thinking about persuading people or bringing people along. Really, it'll just be owning, destroying that person. Even good vegan advocates, I've seen it with a lot of them. There'll be that, it'll be the bivalve, it'll be killing odd order predators. And then because a good vegan advocate doesn't want to discuss those issues, they'll get late, all of a sudden they're labeled as a bad vegan advocate for not wanting to discuss those issues. I've seen that
Yeah,
with David Rams,
that's
I mean,
exactly who I was thinking. Yeah, David
yeah,
Rams.
he's not, I don't even watch David Rams, but well, I might have seen him host a few debates, but I don't watch his channel for his own content or anything. But I think if he doesn't think that's a good opening salvo for the kind of Socratic street epistemology thing, I think fair enough. And I wouldn't press him on any of those issues to be, to want to debate him. But I think with the debate bros, they will really pursue people, and it's to kind of get up the pecking order. I don't know if that's a speciesist term. It's to get up the order of who's a top tier debater. So I took Benny Malone out in a debate, so I move up to S tier in debates because I destroyed him on this issue. It hasn't got a real eye to advocacy and to talking to kind of people on the street or talking to your family about these issues. What are the main issues with veganism, and what are the things that most vegans agree on, is what I think we should be talking about, really. That's the eye on advocacy, how it looks to kind of outsiders almost.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. I was very annoyed by I'm in like the Ask Yourself Discord, and
Mm-hmm.
I was very annoyed by the Ask Yourself community and Nick, and when the whole David Ram situation happened, I was like, I was trying to wrap my head around it. I was like, if he doesn't want to talk about killing predators, like it's I don't think a lot of non-vegans want to hear that.
Yeah.
If a non-vegan hears that vegans want to kill predators, it might turn people off from veganism. So to not want to talk about that, I think is a very yeah, sure. I think it's a good approach.
Well, that's the sociological understanding there as well. It's like, or the advocacy understanding, what's effective to talk about, and what's the first thing you're going to talk to people about veganism. And it's, that's going to be way on my list of topics to bring up. So that's the kind of what I mean by have that eye on advocacy. And I kind of think a lot of the debate bros don't really even care about animals at the end of the day. I think they've just found something that they can win at, and they realized maybe they've been named the traits, they've had that played on them, they couldn't do it, they got persuaded, so now they're vegan, and now that's the kind of only game in town for them as well. It's a bit one-dimensional though, I think.
Yeah, I think there's big issues with name the trait, and I'm a huge fan of name the trait. I use name the trait all the time. Um, but there comes, and I was talking with Haas Vegan about this. Um, yeah, there comes a point where you start to argue sideways, where you're no longer
Mm,
arguing for veganism, you're arguing for name the trait, because it's not often
yeah,
intuitive for a lot of people. Because when you start arguing in the trait, what people hear is, um, uh, like you'll ask, what is true of an animal that, if true of a human, would justify slaughtering humans, and what they hear is, you think I think it's okay to slaughter humans. So now they're in defensive mode and they're trying to um, start to argue against the question and not the
yeah,
actual topic. Yeah.
yeah. That's where they're not tracking it really. I mean, it's a good question, and obviously you've got that history of um, it comes from kind of Singer anyway, and then it's marginal cases, and then there's a bit of history to
Yeah.
the argument anyway. I mean, I think a lot of us were kind of using it in kind of, a normal language philosophy anyway, and then it kind of got formalized. And I've got no issue with it itself. It's just, it's got a time and a place, and kind of when I've had it turned on me for the bivalve thing, and it took me a while to realize, oh, that's what's happening. They're actually trying to get me to name the trait on a hypothetical body part analogy kind of argument, which is just, it's a bit too way out there, really. And I ran a lot of these through Chat GPT to see what AI thought of it, and are they good analogies? For me, when I had all those debates with people, I wasn't really arguing for the conclusion, even about bivalves being sentient. I was trying to get them to drop these arguments from analogy, which I didn't think were good analogies, and I don't think they were doing credit to them as debaters. But you're getting into a lot of continuum fallacies were being used, and fallacies of the grey. It was kind of like, well, if you look at it from scientific point of view, the name the trait people, if they went up against a scientist who's looking for sentience in an organism, they would say they would have 8 traits, say looking for sentience, and they'd be trying to say, well, I have a greater confidence that this organism has sentience because it has 7 out of these 8 traits. But you run name the trait against that. You're saying, well, neurons are present. Well, let's tick that off. And I'd love to see them go up against a scientist and try and run name the trait against it, because I don't think it would wash with the scientist, because this is where philosophy comes up against science, really, because the science will look at all the different traits and try and bring them all together, whereas the name the trait thing is kind of reductionist, looking at one at a time and trying to discount them. Whereas if you're looking at confidence levels, it might be a kind of a more holistic thing of bringing the traits together, especially when it's something like you're actually looking for sentience. We're not even talking about, moral worth, moral value, and that kind of thing. It might be the basis for it, but it's a scientific question at the end of the day. And I just don't think the name the trait thing was a good fit for that, really.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I can envision a name the trait dialogue that would kind of embody more of that scientific um, context. But I definitely see the modern day name the trait dialogue is going to miss out on a lot of. Yeah, I agree. I think I would like to see someone name the trait on a scientist about bivalves.
I think when you're a bit about the advocacy as well, obviously, when you mention the Holocaust or slavery, it's people can't deal with analogies, so I find it's just not worth using any of that language at all. I will say animals are enslaved, but that's not even an analogy. That's just a direct observation of the situation animals are in. But I'm sure there'll be people that would take issue with that even in itself, because they will think you're making an analogy or you're trying to kind of dog whistle towards, the awful things that humans experienced. Whereas for me, I think it's just a plain description of the situation animals are in. And I'm happy to say animals are enslaved, because that's just the fact, basically.
Yeah, the the truth is not my objective goal. The truth is just instrumental towards my ultimate goal of well-being, right? So it's like calling it the animal holocaust is, I think, is extremely accurate. But if I call it the animal holocaust and that turns someone away from veganism, then
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't use that. Yeah.
I find you're going into a different discussion then on Holocaust and is it a good analogy, and everything that's getting away from animals, the situation animals are actually in, isn't good for me for vegan advocacy. So that's what the eye on advocacy is: what's going to actually connect with the person, and what do they already kind of disagree with, which is kind of what I'm trying to write about at the moment, is what values do they already hold that we can kind of get a foothold on. That's why I would, if I was doing name the trait, I would do it between an animal that they already care about. So I've done it in the past with, if they care about dogs, then I will do name the trait for pigs then, and because for me, the difference from going from dogs to pigs isn't much of a leap at all. And if people can't see that, it's really obvious to me that they're just totally brainwashed and speciesist, basically. If they can't see any similarity between, if you take away all the irrelevant variables between dogs and pigs, if you can't empathize with a pig, then I mean, it's something really wrong there. Then
Yeah, I think there's a huge benefit naming the trait on other animals rather than humans, because
yeah,
there's like cognitively, like, yeah, this dissonance where like humans are separate from animals. So it's hard to wrap your head around these hypotheticals or these thought experiments, at least for your average Joe.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to do it with dogs and cats, and yeah.
I think I actually got that approach from I don't know if you've heard Marlon Engel, who's a vegan philosopher. So he's got a really good paper, "The Immorality of Eating Meat," and that's all laid out in propositional form. And even the most vehement kind of anti-vegans back in the day, I used to show them that paper, and I said, "Well, that is actually a really good paper. That's the best vegan argument I've seen." And that kind of started from cats and dogs, or from what you actually care about at the moment, and then saying, "Well, if you care about that, you're committed to at least being against these things that happen to animals." And these things that happen to animals are kind of unavoidable in animal agriculture as we know it. Therefore, you're committed to these conclusions, basically a vegan conclusion. So I was lucky to come across that fairly early on as well. So I really recommend that paper. And to me, that was kind of a kind of name the trait kind of argument, or at least going from what people care about, which is still an approach I use now. Going from, if you can find an animal they care about, even if you say, well, I've seen people talking about, oh, dogs love their owners, the amount of oxytocin that's released in the brain of a dog is amazing when they greet their owner. And then pull up a paper, goats have like 3 times the amount of oxytocin when they see someone they know, whether it's a goat friend or a human they know, so what now, goats are actually more affectionate than dogs. They might not all be able to show it, and same with sheep. I think it's just people don't know about animals, especially, it's the meat paradox thing, diminishing the mind in the animals that we use. And that's why I say you can't think clearly about the animals that you are eating. That's actually been shown with the meat paradox kind of research. If you're exploiting animals, you will diminish them and say they've got less capacity for anything really, less capacity for sentience, less intelligence, that type of thing, less capacity for pain, anything like that. So it's because you've got that self-interest in marking them down in that way. Whereas the animals you do care about, you will mark up and say, well, they do have these capacities and we should care about them. But I think, stop eating animals first and then see how you feel about animals. And I think a lot of people will have the shift then.
Yeah, I've heard of like the studies they've done where it's like you feed someone fruits and vegetables and ask them, yeah, what do you think about how we treat animals? And they'll say like, oh yeah, it's terrible, it's awful, and then or feed them like animal products, some pepperoni pizza or some cheeseburgers,
Yeah,
and they'll start making excuses like, oh, they're not that intelligent, and like we've been breeding them, and yeah.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, so it looks like we're coming up on an hour, and I understand you have to go to work. So I think now is a good time to end. I guess, do you want to, again, promote your book? I want people to buy it because it's a good book. Um,
Yeah. So most of these are covered. Some of them are covered briefly. I think it's the main ones that I came across kind of on social media and talking to family and friends, really, from being a vegan for I think 12 years now. And like I said, vegetarian first, just let people know that cognitive, as vegans, we've all been there. And you're a veganism, you might think it sounds strange, or you might think vegans are extreme. And I think most of us had those thoughts and feelings. I thought vegans were extreme, but then just look at the arguments and who has the better arguments at the end of the day, and just try and think about animals. Let's try and look in a sober way about the actual situation animals are in a completely, if you try and look at it objectively, I don't think there's any doubt that we are using animals in an instrumental way to benefit ourselves, and it's causing a lot of suffering. If you're utilitarian, if you're rights based, it's violating a lot of rights. So pretty much any ethical system anyone uses, if you're a virtue ethicist, even, how can it be virtuous to treat animals like that? And I think any ethical or any normative system results in veganism if you look at how animals are being used and abused, basically.
there we have it, Benny Malone. Yeah, it was good. It was good chatting with you, man. Hopefully, we can do
Yeah,
this
good to speak
again.
to you. Yeah.